November 1943, Berlin. The man who would calculate Germany's defeat 18 months before it happened was reading a stack of captured American supply manifests by the light of a single desk lamp. His name was Colonel Baron Alexis von Roenne. His rank was Oberst. His position was Chief of Fremde Heeres West, Foreign Armies West, the specialized intelligence branch of the German army responsible for analyzing the Allies in the Western theater. He was a Baltic German, a Prussian intellectual, a meticulous, almost compulsive professional. The men who worked for him said he was the best intelligence officer in the Wehrmacht. The documents on his desk had been captured in Italy. Routine cargo manifests, fuel requisitions, ammunition stockpiles. The kind of paperwork an army produces when it is supplying itself for a long war. But the numbers on the page were not numbers any German intelligence officer had ever been trained to imagine. He read the manifest a second time, then a third. He removed his reading glasses, polished them with the corner of his uniform sleeve, though they were already clean, and read it once more. The numbers had not changed. What you are about to learn is that the most senior intelligence officers in Germany and Japan knew with mathematical certainty that they had already lost the Second World War. They wrote it down. They submitted it. They tried to make their leaders understand. And what happened to the men who tried to tell the truth is one of the darkest stories of the 20th century. A story that explains, more than any other, why the United States refused to accept a negotiated peace. In 1940, 3 years before the captured manifests reached Zossen, the Wehrmacht had conquered France in 6 weeks. The German army was, by any measure, the most professionally accomplished military force in the world. Their generals were brilliant. Their tactical doctrine was revolutionary. Their engineering, Tigers, Panthers, Me-262 jets, V-2 rockets, represented the cutting edge of human technology. Japan had reasons of its own to be confident. In the months following Pearl Harbor, the Imperial forces had taken Singapore, the Philippines, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies. The British battleships Prince of Wales and Repulse had been sunk in 3 hours. The Imperial Japanese Navy was, by 1942, arguably the most capable carrier force on the planet. Both empires had earned the right to be confident. But confidence is not the same thing as accuracy. And in 1940, behind closed doors, Adolf Hitler made a prediction to his inner circle. He told them that an American intervention by mass deliveries of planes and war materials will not change the outcome of the war. He believed it. So did the men who served him. A few months later, the commander of the German Air Force, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, went further. Göring famously dismissed the entire American industrial economy with a single phrase. The United States, he said,
a nation that built refrigerators and razor blades.
Combat aircraft were a different matter entirely. Americans, in Göring's professional military judgment, could not produce them. This was not stupidity. This was ideology. The Nazi worldview held that democracies were structurally weak, softened by capitalism, paralyzed by debate, fractured by racial impurity. American women, in particular, occupied a specific category in Nazi doctrine. The slogan was Kinder, Küche, Kirche. Children, kitchen, church. German intelligence analysts could not conceptualize a society that would mobilize its female population into heavy industry. The very idea was absurd to them. So when reports of American production began to arrive, they were rejected as fabricated propaganda. In Tokyo, a different ideology produced the same blindness. The Imperial High Command believed in Yamato Damashi, the indomitable Japanese fighting spirit. Spirit, they believed, defeated material. The Americans were materialistic, soft, racially mixed. They would not endure the casualties of a long Pacific War. The attack on Pearl Harbor would shatter their morale, and a negotiated peace would follow. Both empires looked at America and saw what their ideologies told them to see. But the war did not end in 1940. And in November 1943, on a desk in Zosen, the captured manifests had arrived. And the numbers on the page were the first hard evidence that everything Berlin and Tokyo believed about the United States was wrong. Von Roenne was 41 years old in November 1943. He came from an ancient Baltic German family. He had served in the First World War as a young officer. In the years between the wars, he had developed a reputation in the small, professional community of German military intelligence as something rare. An analyst who refused to shape facts to fit policy. His office at Zosen, south of Berlin, was modest. A desk, a lamp, a safe for classified documents. The walls were covered with maps of the Western Allied positions, the Mediterranean theater, the British Isles, the projected invasion zones of France. That night, the smell of cold ink hung in the room. Outside, the city was darkening into another expected raid. The desk lamp hummed. Von Roenne sat down with the captured documents. He began with the fuel requisitions. A single American corps in Italy was receiving more gasoline in a week than Army Group Center on the Eastern Front was being allocated for the entire month of October. He read the figure 3 times. He compared it to his own files. The numbers were correct. He moved to the ammunition stockpiles. A single American infantry division carried more artillery shells in its standard supply load than the entire Italian campaign had been allocated for the German defense. He turned to the motorized transport. The Wehrmacht, the army that had invented Blitzkrieg, was still moving most of its supplies by horse-drawn wagon in 1943. The captured manifests showed an American supply system that was entirely motorized. Trucks, jeeps, half-tracks, by the tens of thousands. Mathematically impossible, he thought. We have calculated wrong, or they have built something we did not believe could be built. He set the document down. Then he opened the master file his department had assembled on American industrial production. The aggregated intelligence, drawn from neutral observers, captured technical journals, photographic reconnaissance, and the careful work of men like himself, told a story that no German officer had been trained to read. In 1943 alone, the United States had produced 37,198 tanks. The entire German war machine that same year had produced approximately 12,000. The Americans had built 3 German armies worth of tanks in 12 months. In 1943, the United States had produced 85,898 combat aircraft. Germany, its factories now under bombardment, had managed 20,600. And the most devastating number of all, the United States was launching merchant ships and Liberty vessels at a rate 7 times faster than Admiral Karl Donitz's U-boats could physically locate and sink them. The Battle of the Atlantic was already lost. Not in tactics, in arithmetic. Von Roenne understood, with the cold and total clarity that comes only to professionals confronting the end of their profession, that Germany had already lost the war. It was November 1943. The war would continue for another 18 months. He would not survive to see the end. Von Roenne did what a professional officer is trained to do. He wrote the report. He documented the captured manifests. He documented the production figures. He documented the ratios. He concluded, in the careful language of military intelligence, that the material balance had shifted, decisively and irreversibly, against Germany. He submitted the report through channels, and then he watched what happened to it. The intelligence apparatus of the Wehrmacht had developed, by late 1943, a quiet and lethal habit. Reports from FHW, von Roenne's department, were systematically reviewed by officers at the Armed Forces High Command before they reached Hitler. Numbers that contradicted the Führer's view of the war were adjusted. American production figures were routinely cut in half. Soviet manpower estimates were minimized. Allied invasion capabilities were downgraded. By the time the reports reached Hitler's desk, they no longer matched the documents von Roenne had filed. The Führer was not lied to, exactly. He was simply protected from the truth by men who had learned that truth-tellers were not promoted. Von Roenne kept writing. Late in the evenings, in his office at Zossen, with the lamp humming and the bombers passing overhead, he continued to produce accurate intelligence. He documented the truth, even though he knew it would be ignored. I will document the truth, he thought. What they do with it is no longer my concern. Why? Because he was a professional. Because the truth had its own value, even when no one wanted to hear it. Because somewhere, in some Prussian instinct older than the regime he served, he believed that an officer who lied about the numbers was no longer an officer at all. And every minute he wrote, the gap widened. 5,000 miles away, at the Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant in Michigan, a B-24 Liberator heavy bomber was rolling off the assembly line every 63 minutes. 4 engines, 10 machine guns, a bomb load of 8,000 pounds, a range of 2,000 miles. Every 63 minutes, day and night, 3 shifts, 7 days a week. Every 63 minutes, von Roenne's calculation got worse. He kept writing. The reports kept being adjusted. The Führer kept being protected. And on the other side of the world, another set of cables was being read by men who could not say what the cables meant. Stop for a moment. There is a small laboratory in Newark, New Jersey in 1941. A chemist named Forrest Mars and his team are working on a problem. The problem is this. American soldiers, when deployed to tropical combat zones, find that chocolate bars in their pockets turn to sludge in the heat. The morale value of chocolate is significant. The logistical value of chocolate that does not melt is therefore a military priority. The solution is a hard sugar shell coated around a small piece of chocolate. The shell holds in tropical heat. The chocolate inside survives. The product is given a name based on the initials of the 2 men who founded the company, M and M. M&Ms were a military procurement product. They were developed because the United States Army wanted its soldiers to have chocolate in the Pacific. Now consider that Wonder State Basket Company in Little Rock, Arkansas, a firm that had spent 40 years making wooden picnic baskets, was, by 1942, manufacturing armament shipping cases for the United States Ordnance Department. Mars Candy, Wonder State Basket, the Singer Sewing Machine Company, the Lionel Toy Trains Corporation, the Frigidaire division of General Motors. All of them converted, producing weapons or weapon components. This is the system von Roenne was calculating against. Not just factories. A society that had decided at every level, from heavy industry down to the candy company, that the Second World War would be won by manufacturing. This is what Hermann Göring had called refrigerators and razor blades. In 1942 alone, that nation produced 47,836 combat aircraft. In 1943, it produced 85,898. In 1944, the peak year, it produced 96,318, a figure greater than Japan and Germany combined for the entire war. Over the 45 months of American involvement, the United States produced approximately 300,000 military aircraft, more than 40% of every combat plane built by every belligerent nation on every side of the war. And in Berlin, von Roenne kept writing the reports nobody read. By the summer of 1945, a parallel collapse was unfolding inside the Japanese government. The men in Tokyo had reached, by their own calculations, the same conclusion von Roenne had reached 18 months earlier in Berlin. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo had begun, in early July, to send instructions to Ambassador Naotake Sato in Moscow. The Soviet Union was still technically neutral in the Pacific War. Togo wanted Sato to approach the Soviets and ask them to act as an intermediary for a negotiated peace. There was a problem with the cables. The American cryptanalysis program, codenamed MAGIC, had broken the Japanese diplomatic cipher years earlier. Every cable Togo sent to Sato was being decrypted in Washington, often within hours of its transmission. President Harry Truman, Secretary of War Henry Stimson, and Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal were reading Togo's instructions to Sato in near real time, at the same desk, on the same morning, as they read intelligence reports from the Pacific. The Americans were reading the cables simultaneously with the Russians. They knew exactly what Tokyo was offering. The first cable instructed Sato to seek Soviet mediation toward a peace settlement. That was not, by any reasonable definition, an offer of unconditional surrender. The second cable specified the non-negotiable Japanese condition. The kokutai, the national polity, centered on the sovereign and divine status of Emperor Hirohito, must be preserved. The emperor must remain. His authority must remain. His political power must remain. That was not a minor diplomatic detail. It was, in the judgment of every senior American policymaker reading the intercepts, the same condition that had destroyed the peace of 1918. In 1918, the Allies had accepted an armistice that left the German military intact and the German political class in place. Within 15 years, that intact military and that intact political class had produced Adolf Hitler. The stab in the back myth, the lie that Germany had not really been defeated on the battlefield, had been allowed to flourish because Germany had not been forced to acknowledge defeat in any unambiguous way. The Casablanca Conference of January 1943 had been Roosevelt's answer to that history. The doctrine of unconditional surrender was not rhetoric. It was the lesson of 1918 applied. End the war wrong, get another war. If the emperor's substantive political authority was preserved, the militarist faction that had launched the war could survive inside the system, exactly as the German general staff had survived inside Weimar. The American policymakers reading the MAGIC intercepts understood this with the clarity of men who had seen this exact movie before. There was something else. While Togo was cabling Sato in Moscow, while the diplomatic feelers were moving through Switzerland and Sweden and the Vatican, the Imperial Japanese Army was reinforcing the southern home island of Kyushu. In June 1945, 3 divisions had been positioned to defend the anticipated American invasion beaches. By early August, that figure had risen to 13. Civilians were being trained to fight with bamboo spears. School children were being prepared as part of Operation Ketsugo, the suicidal final defense plan that envisioned the death of millions of Japanese civilians as the price of national honor. Coastal caves were being dug. Kamikaze aircraft were being held back by the thousands for the invasion fleet. The American intelligence officers reading the MAGIC intercepts could see both things at once. They could see Togo's cables to Moscow asking for peace. They could see the troop manifests showing 13 divisions on Kyushu and millions of civilians being mobilized for total resistance. The peace feelers and the war preparations were happening in the same country at the same time, ordered by the same government. Have you ever known something to be true and watched the people around you refuse to believe it? Multiply that feeling by a nation. That was Truman's morning briefing in late July 1945. 2 documents on the same desk. A government asking the Soviets for peace mediation, and a military preparing to kill 1 million of its own civilians rather than surrender. This is the part of the story that requires a question most people never ask. When smart people inside an evil system tell the truth and are destroyed for it, who exactly are we fighting? The system that murdered them, or the people trapped inside that system? There is no clean answer, but there is a hard one. The Japanese diplomats writing peace cables and the Japanese generals reinforcing Kyushu were both telling the truth about themselves. The system had room for both impulses simultaneously and could not resolve them. That was the system. That was what made it dangerous. That was why a conditional peace could not be accepted. Not because the diplomats were lying, because the system itself could not be reformed from within. It could only be replaced. This is what Roosevelt had understood at Casablanca in 1943. This is what Truman understood reading the Magic Intercepts in 1945. And in Berlin, in October 1944, in a prison courtyard, a meat hook was being prepared. The Plötzensee Prison stood on the western edge of Berlin. The morning of October 12, 1944, was cold and overcast. The smell of damp brick and machine oil drifted from the small execution shed at the rear of the courtyard. Air raid sirens were sounding in the distance. Allied bombers, somewhere over Hamburg, the same bombers von Roenne had calculated could not exist. Von Roenne was brought from his cell. He had been arrested 2 months earlier in the wake of the July 20th plot against Hitler. The formal charge was complicity. His connections to the resistance had been documented. His refusal to falsify production figures had been noted. His personal Lutheran faith, never abandoned, never adjusted to the new ideology, had been used against him at the People's Court. The verdict had taken less than an hour. He walked across the courtyard. He was 41 years old. He was, by every account that survived, calm. The execution shed contained meat hooks. Hitler had ordered the conspirators of July 20th hanged with piano wire, suspended from meat hooks like cattle. The official photographer was present. The Führer wished to view the films later. Von Roenne, as far as the records show, said nothing. The numbers were correct, he thought, perhaps. Everything else is detail. The same captured American supply manifest that had condemned Germany also condemned the man who had counted them correctly. The lamp on his desk in Zossen was dark now. The reports continued without him, and they continued to be ignored. He died on October 12, 1944. Germany would surrender 7 months later. On September 2, 1945, a Japanese delegation boarded the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. The instrument of surrender was unconditional. The mathematics of destruction had completed itself. In the months that followed, the United States Strategic Bombing Survey began its interrogations. Surviving German and Japanese commanders were shown the production figures the Allies had compiled during the war. Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, General Alfred Jodl, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring himself, the man who had once dismissed America as a producer of refrigerators. The transcripts of those interrogations record a particular kind of silence. The numbers were laid in front of men who had spent 5 years rejecting them. 300,000 aircraft, 86,000 tanks, 2,700 Liberty ships, 2.5 million machine guns, 41 billion rounds of ammunition. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring asked about the systematic destruction of the Luftwaffe and Germany's inability to compete with American production, said only this: "I believe the Führer was not very much elated at the loss of efficiency of our air forces." It is a quiet sentence, characteristically German, understated to the point of evasion. But it is also, at its core, the same admission von Roenne had made on a desk in Zossen in November 1943. The numbers were correct. Everything else was detail. The captured supply manifests von Roenne had read that night did not vanish in the war. They were preserved. After 1945, they entered the German Federal Archives in Koblenz and Freiburg. They are still there. cardboard folders. The original margin notes are in pencil, in his handwriting. The annotations are precise, measured, professional. He had calculated his country's defeat exactly. He had not been listened to. He had been hanged for the crime of being correct. The United States did not reject a peace offer after Pearl Harbor in any meaningful sense. There was never an offer to reject. Only conditional feelers from a government that was simultaneously preparing 13 divisions and a civilian militia for the suicidal defense of Kyushu. What the United States rejected was the ending of 1918. What the United States rejected was a settlement that would leave the systems that had started the war alive to start the next one. The mathematics had been correct from the beginning. The tragedy was that being correct was not enough.